Without further ado, Paul, I'd like you to jump in and just, if you take us as human beings with our past and our future, what do you think are the sorts of things we should be doing to develop ourselves, assuming that it's not a good place to stay still? What are the sort of things do you think?
I think the biggest lie in our culture today is you do you. You're okay as you are. You're lovely as you are, right? It's like, I'm not lovely as I am. Okay, I mean, I'm a particularly unlovely creature in many respects, but it's like, I have, and I don't even enjoy this. I only started enjoying high performance when I actually picked up some momentum. My background is, I've been clean for 10 years, but my background is advertising, drug addiction, alcoholism, work and in Asia. So if you imagine sort of like Don Draper in a girly bar in Bangkok, that was me. And I had a great time. It was fantastic fun. It was absolutely brilliant until the wheels came off. And the wheels always come off. But I'm much happier in recovery. And, to your point earlier on, it's like the fundamental lesson that, in active addiction, everything is about self-gratification. Okay, it's about putting yourself first, and the fundamental lesson in recovery that you learn is your life is not about you. I think we spoke briefly about one of the biggest problems with society today is how men have been diminished, how being masculine is seen as a negative thing, how you're getting these narratives about toxic masculinity. And whilst, there is a certain amount of toxic masculinity, there's also toxic femininity. And one of the reasons men are not behaving like proper men in the robust Christian masculine sense of that is because they have very few role models. And, many people would say it all went tits up from the Industrial Revolution, where boys were no longer initiated into male society. And, any kind of initiation ritual revolves around the boy being separated from his mother, being thrust into the company of men. The women make a big to-do about it. The men sort of strip him naked, give him something to drink, slap him around a bit, give him a stick, and then boot him off into the forest. I mean, he almost gets eaten by a bear, comes back 2 weeks later, like absolutely starving, and they lock the end of his old fella off and sort of like give him a drink. And he's a man. And what's he learned in that 2 weeks? He's learned that life is tough. Life is not fair. You're not in control. Your life is not about you, and you're going to die, right? And those to me are the fundamental life lessons. Now, some of those we pick up in recovery, not necessarily all of them. So I suppose if you're talking about, if I wanted to talk about transformation, because I think that's what we're talking about, transformation in its essence is getting from point A, seeing where you are and having some dissatisfaction with where you are, seeing where you want to be, point B, and looking at the gap. And then any good coach or mentor will say, okay, what do we need to do in this gap? And essentially what people do is they break it down into manageable steps. And so in recovery, the term that we have for this is that we have a sponsor. And if someone comes into recovery, if they wander in shaking like a shitting dog into their first AA meeting, sort of like, smelling of meth or whatever, and they're enough pain that they want to change, then what will happen is they'll find a sponsor. That sponsor is someone who will take them through the 12 steps. So point B is you don't need to be in this pain. You don't need to have this suffering anymore. You can evolve into someone who is no longer reliant on drugs and alcohol, right? You can become a sober, clean member of society and live a life beyond your wildest dreams. And the way you do that is we take them through the 12 steps. So the gap from A to B has 12 equal increments to it. And we do that in AA, we do it through working through the first 164 pages of the big book. So I think that's what it is. I think it's a realization of where we are and where we want to be and what steps or what the pathway is to get there, and to have someone to guide us. But here's the thing. One thing that recovery's really taught with me is the someone's ability to change, okay, does not come from the sponsor, does not come from the mentor. Does not come from the coach. It comes through two places. I'm a Christian. I believe it's God. I believe it comes from the Holy Spirit. But if you want, you can take a secular approach to that. I would just say it comes from a higher power. It comes from an agency outside of you. Okay? And how does that agency get to act? Three things. The person who wants to be changed, the mentee, or the individual, they have to have levels of honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness to go through it, right? And a dab won't do you. You know, it's like you've got to be honest, you've got to be open-minded, you've got to be willing, and you've got to be fairly consistent at that. If you've got those three elements and you're willing to take direction, then the world's your limit.
How do you get to that place of open-mindedness, Paul? I mean,
pain.
Yeah.
We learn at the speed of pain. One of the reasons. So here's the thing, and listen, I got to be really honest with you. I have been my sponsors did a magnificent job of brainwashing and indoctrinating me in the AA way. I haven't had a drink, drug, or cigarette since my first AA meeting. I absolutely believe it works. I've seen it work in my life, and the people that I work with who follow the instructions, they don't ever pick up again. The thing is, most people don't want to follow the instructions.
Yeah.
So as far as I'm concerned, it comes down to following the instructions. And again, being honest, open-minded, and willing. Your question was, what was your question?
How do you get to that place of sort of?
So how do you get to that place for such amazing change to take place? Because I loved drinking and using. I was very good at it. Right, I wasn't slumming around the park bench. For me, it was sort of like, presidential suite in very nice hotels with big bags of dubious substances and very attractive young ladies. How did I get to that point? Pain. Pain is the touchstone of all spiritual growth. In recovery, we say we learn at the speed of pain. So at that point, I was desperate. And in recovery, we call it a bottom. And what characterizes a bottom, where the pain of staying where you are is greater than the pain of trying something new.
Yeah, great, thank you. I think I attended, well, it's a friend of mine actually who's the chairman of a local AA group. He invited me along for a similar reason we've just articulated. And the thing that struck me actually is that having completed the 12 steps, the problem actually starts.
Yeah. More will be revealed.
You've then had some sort of purification process or something, and then you've got to face the world in a different way. And the thing that struck me with that was, from a spiritual perspective, again, when things get difficult again, who do you turn to? And the notion of self-reliance, I've found certainly in my experience through a lot of pain and getting other people out of extreme pain and extremely difficult situations is my faith. There's really no other place to go. There's things you can do, and I've actually said this to a finance director in the middle of a turnaround at construction business in Birmingham. I was turning around. She was in tears. She couldn't cope. I said, look, these are the things we can do, and we'll give the rest to God, which isn't exactly a politically correct script in this day and age. But actually, it was interesting because she then went on to say, actually, it's interesting you say that because somebody else had mentioned this to me, and then she started her journey. But I think,
Well, can I just stop you there? I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think we're at a turning point of our culture where I really think the world knows that, if you'll excuse my French, we're fucked without God.
Yeah.
I think people listen, I work in one of the most, it could be worse. I could be an arms dealer. I could be a pornographer. But let me tell you, advertising is not a godly business.
No. Not
in any way, shape, or form. Advertising, and this is why advertising people are having such adverse reactions to what's going on at the moment, and there's so much virtue signaling. Because to be successful in advertising, you have to be comfortable with the fact that your job is getting people to buy stuff they don't need and can't afford to impress people they don't like. Yeah. That is what you do in advertising. Yeah. Now, a lot of advertising people aren't particularly comfortable in that. In 2020, my industry, it's never been a hotbed of mental health to start off with. But in 2020, it went clinically insane, right? It should have been sectioned. And all I'll say, and people realize that what they've got isn't working with COVID. I mean, I heard a great debate between, actually, it was Carl Benjamin, and I love Carl. He's one of my favorite. He's my favorite atheist, and he was discussing. He was having a talk with, I think, Justin Pajot, who's a Greek Orthodox. He carves icons, and Justin Pajot was ribbing Carl, and he was saying, he said, you know, the new atheists, they came along 10 years ago, and they thought they had they had great critiques of religion, but they had no answers. He goes, what did they give us? What did they offer us? Fast food and porn, right? I mean, it's like, that's it. It's like, if you look at physical comfort, it's like, you know, anyone with an average wage in any major city lives better than European royalty did 100 years ago. They could have more food, more drugs, more sexual experiences, more of anything. Yeah. And yet people are more miserable than ever.
I know. I think there's quite a few examples actually of where people have actually had that utopia, but actually that does turn into a hell where you're surrounded with all the. It comes down to, I think, what do you love? Because as men in particular, there are lots of things that we can love, like women, sex, drugs, rock and roll, whatever it is, which can become quite obsessive. And that in recovery, we've got a very simple idea for that. But in recovery, we say whatever you put in front of your recovery, you'll lose. And from a Christian point of view, we can say whatever you put in front of Jesus becomes an idol. Yeah. And you can find out what people worship. It's just by looking in their calendar and looking at their bank account, looking at what they spend money on and where they spend their time. Yeah, I mean, that's the reason why Jesus spoke more about money than anything else. And I think the first commandment, practically, and I think it is very practical, the Bible. I think it does say, love God and love other people. Yeah. And if you do that, and beyond that, there is no law. And the difficulty is, if you don't love God, who do you turn to? I think the other absurdity from a practical perspective is, we know so little, and the assumption is that we know what we're talking about. But you walk out the door, Paul, you look at, I live in a beautiful part of Surrey. It's just beyond comprehension. Everything's impossible. Yeah. And yet we think we know, we think we have the knowledge to understand this. And everything that any scientist ever gets to, there's one line in the Bible that says, Jesus holds all things together. And a scientist found this thing that's shaped the shape of a cross. And pretty much every bit of science. And it's like, they've even noticed that atoms actually don't even exist, but they highly rely on each other. So, and Jesus is about relationship, and so it all comes back.
It's the Holy Trinity.
Yeah, it all comes back to this, and yet we think we know better. And I think this whole concept and education is about, look, Paul, you face this situation, this is what you do, as if you are then self-equipped. But I think the reality actually is...
well, can I just stop you? The other mistake we make is that we think we're rational beings.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, I know I'm not a rational being. I figured that one out quite early. Again, because I look at the mayhem of my drug use, I go, what? I mean, if I had $1 for someone every time I said, what was I thinking? Yeah. Okay, so that was really obvious. It's like, I know my thinking could get me in a lot of trouble. But most people you ask them, they think they're rational, logical creatures. We're not. Forget about it. Our brains it's like we think we live life like a sports commentary where the action where the action and the narrative happen at the same time. No. We're doing shit, and our brains are just post-rationalizing.
I know
what our emotions are telling us to do, and most people don't realize that.
I know, and I think that again, come back to the Bible. The Bible says the church is formed when more than one person gets together. And I think that we are highly reliant on other people practically. And I think the logic I've noticed, when individually, and I think one of the problems with the shutdown is that people have been working by themselves, and that's very delusional because no one's telling them they're an idiot, or they're doing something, or give them a steer, or sharing love with them. that's very unhealthy. The second thing I think is when we do get together and we show love to each other and really listen to each other. We acknowledge people for who they are. We take an interest in their views. Then something very interesting happens that actually frees us up. And yet that's the antithesis of what we're taught, is that you do this and you do that. But in fact, if you give someone the freedom to do what they do, then they will naturally connect with God, because God is about freedom, and then they will start doing the right things. And I think the difficulty is, and you and I absolutely detest ideology and wokeness as much as each other. The difficulty with ideology is it then effectively creates a tyranny, which is the antithesis of freedom. And what that does is it messes individuals up and their integrity, and and morality goes to rat shit. So I think there's this huge paradox that Jesus is about freedom. He gives us a lot of freedom to do our stuff, but with that freedom, actually, it is actually our part of our moral compass.
But we're like dogs. We're working animals. We're most free when we're given rules and stuff to do. That is when we're most free.
Yeah.
Same as dogs.
Yeah.
If you kept a dog, and I've never had a dog, but I know if you kept a dog and you never trained it, you never did anything with it, you just it would be mayhem.
Yeah.
If you train that dog, you put it on lead, you give it stuff to do, it's happy.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, great.
One of the things that I've realized is that sort of like, again, if you want to talk about high performance, there's an idea in elite teams, and I actually heard this from the coach of the All Blacks. He said, what I do is, when I teach mental skills to the All Blacks, I come in and I talk about mindset, skill set, structure. And he said, which one do you think is most important? Most people said mindset. I'm like, I think it might be structure. And hey presto, I was right. It's like, he said, because, if you're in the All Blacks, you can get to the All Blacks, you must have a pretty good mindset. Okay, you've obviously got quite a good skill set, but it's structure. If you've got a really good structure, you don't actually even need discipline. Never mind about motivation. I used to love saying, listen, motivation is for amateurs. Inspiration is for amateurs. If you're a pro, what you need is discipline. But if your design beats discipline, your structure is good enough.
Yeah.
And where does structure come from? Routine.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think that's a lot of what I do when I turn companies around. I always put the structure, and I describe the structure of an organisation as being the vehicle, for the appropriate terrain, and that can change within an organisation. But I think that's defined by, people getting together, talking about their respective elements of it within the structure and what they're doing, and not in isolation, but within a structure, and all accountable to each other. And I think, I agree.
Yeah.
Without that, and also the other thing is boundaries. So, if someone's going to go and climb Everest, they need a budget, and so there have to be boundaries. But within that, there has to be the right degree of freedom within that structure to allow that person to, be themselves. Because I think the big problem at the moment is that people are losing themselves because they feel as though that they haven't got the courage to step out and be themselves. And if you don't do that, you get into this horrible.
Okay, so can I share a quick story with you?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay, so this happened to me yesterday. I had a sponsor of mine who relapsed. He's 61 years old. He's a very successful real estate agent. And his relapse was happened because he wasn't following instructions. He wasn't calling in. He wasn't checking in with his fellows. He wasn't calling me. He wasn't making regular meetings, and so he ODs on Valium. Calls up his girlfriend. Calls up his ex-wife. She gets concerned. The two of them meet at his place, which was not a good situation. He's all over the place. They're concerned that he's OD'd. He couldn't tell them how much he'd taken. Ambulance gets called, doesn't want to go in the ambulance. Cops get called, gets arrested, ends up getting sectioned for 8 days, spends 21 days in rehab, comes out of rehab, and then works himself up into a froth about whether he should get vaccinated or not. calls up this guy who's great. I love this guy, but he's when I say he's a street preacher, I mean he is a street preacher. He's not part of my church, but my sponsee met this guy at a men's night that my pastor had, and for whatever reason calls up this guy and he says, I don't know what vaccine, I don't know if I should get vaccinated. Now it so happens that this street preacher is a massive, I mean, he might have well as called Alex Jones, right? I mean, he would have been, or David Icke, right? I mean, it's like, he would have probably got more reasonable advice from David Icke. So this guy, but what this guy did say was, he said, the problem is with you, is you're riddled with fear. And unless you have Jesus Christ, you'll always be riddled with fear. And he baptized him within an hour, took him down to Bondi Beach and baptized him. And that was it. It was like, yeah, you're full of fear.
Yeah.
And there is no, and it's like, I laugh. I belong to this thing called Thought Leaders in Australia. And they had this, they had this guest star keynote from this Australian surfer. And this doesn't, I am what I am. I've been a professional creative for 30 years. I've spent 10 years in recovery, listened to every kind of war story you could possibly imagine. So some surfer coming in and talking about, he said it was like how to conquer fear. And I was like, this is going to be bullshit. I knew it was going to be bullshit because I thought he's not going to talk about Jesus. He's not going to talk about God. I know he can't because they won't have the appetite for it. Therefore, this is just going to be a load of CDT bullshit. And the guy was well-meaning and he said some nice things, but I go, it doesn't work. You can't live without fear unless you have faith in the Lord. And even then, it's not like it's a magic bullet, right? It's like you don't suddenly become Saint Paul. Yeah. It's a battle, but it's more a question of knowing that you don't need to fear. It's more of a question of knowing that faith will keep you out of fear, and it becomes a strategic decision. And that's what the world has just had a motherload of dumped on them, fear, and people know they can't cope with it. And that's to your earlier point about talking to that lady about let's leave it to God. All of a sudden, like 2 years ago, where people would have just, called for security and asked to have you removed from the building. Now I'm finding people are open to that because they don't have any answers, which goes back to our first point, which is pain. People are in a level of pain and a level of uncertainty where they don't know what they're doing and they don't know who else. They don't know anyone who knows what they're doing. Who are you going to trust? Boris Johnson? Joe Biden? CNN, the BBC, all our institutions. Now is the time for evangelization.
I think that's right. I think the rational reason that people have got a very big reason to fear, because if just go back to the pandemic, I think people came into the pandemic a bit sort of punch drunk, having done the same thing for the last 40 years, largely just consuming excessively to fuel their dopamine and drive their cravings for material goods. It all came crashing down. There's been a period of where I do believe Jesus has been very present, practically in terms of bringing people down to earth. You can see the relationships forming, appreciating people, all that stuff. The nurses coming up above the sort of the traditional sort of superheroes who've now become idiots. People driving in flash cars now are shamed. So the whole thing's been turned on its head. But if out of that, right, if the starting point that we were talking about before is that we know very little and we know virtually nothing, then if your skill set is to rely on your own resources, you have a very good reason to be fearful because the carpet will fall from under your feet. But if like you and I, Paul, who are on a journey, who really understand what it is to have a relationship with Jesus is like, and the reality of that, then we do not have a reason to fear. And in fact, this is my strength. I do talks at on MBA programs, and I talk about grace and love, which are the two biblical tools to.
Wow, that's great. You don't hear enough about grace.
No, and grace is so important because we are so imperfect. So, and this is the antithesis of the new woke thing, which is a self-reliant thing, which is utterly graceless. And without grace, we really can't operate. So, I think it's from a very practical perspective.
It lacks grace. It also lacks forgiveness.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's also no forgiveness whatsoever.
Yeah, forgiveness is
it's
vital.
Condemnation. It's a shame culture.
Yeah, and I think as well, digging out everything that's wrong, and this thing around victimhood also is not taking accountability. People who blame us. I think there's an element of actually picking up communication, which is some of the skill sets. I think there are some underlying skill sets that, on top of what we just talked about, are important to understand. So, how do you bring someone to a point whereby they realise that humility is the best place to operate from?
Paid. Yeah, that's it. It's like I mean, listen. Hey, I'm not saying. I'm sure Jordan Peterson, but if you booked a few sessions with him, I'm sure there's some. There are some psychological, cognitive techniques. But for me, it's people. Pain is what motivates people to change.
Yeah.
And that could be real pain. That could be psychological pain in the form of fear.
Yeah.
Uncertainty, financial insecurity.
Yeah.
Low self-esteem.
Yeah. The way I tend to approach that is through the Winning Thinking program. Is actually to shine a light into different perspectives, which is very painful. Because if your life has been all about you for most of your career, and I say to you, take a different perspective, and that's simplification of the first chapter of the Winning Thinking program, and put other people first, and from that perspective take a new action, then that's actually quite painful. But what's interesting is that it develops relationships. So by the end of it, you really know people intimately, and I think that really matters in an organisation, because I don't know what you think about if you just listen to the dialogue that takes place in organisations. Most of it is utter rubbish. No one's interested in it. It doesn't matter to us at all. We've got the dialogue very wrong. We're talking about, some very tedious. And you and I find ourselves talking about these things that really don't matter to us at all. And what really matters is, do I really understand you, Paul? Am I really listening to you? Am I using your name? Am I acknowledging you for who you are? These are the things that really maintain our well-being, and it's nothing to do with really what we normally talk about in business, like marketing strategy and financial results, and all this stuff around leadership development, as you said earlier. Frankly, it's bullshit. A lot of it, because it's not rooted in.
It's a dance. It's like everyone talks about accountability and authenticity, and it's like it's kabuki theatre, as Dan Draper would say.
In fact, it's bloody worse because it gets worse.
And honestly, a lot of it is absolute bollocks. It's like, give me a good military leader any day. Yeah. I think that's one of the problem with politics is we don't have enough sailors, soldiers, and I don't know if the Air Force make good politics, but you know what I mean? It's like that's real leadership.
Yeah.
Sort of like getting people to sign off on a campaign that's not really a lot of risk. Getting people to run towards machine guns.
Yeah,
that's leadership.
Yeah, I know. and nurses as well. I mean, my first wife was a nurse, and she used to work at A&E, and I was a senior manager in my early 30s. And I struck me that her responsibility is far greater than mine, and she got paid.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like no one dies in advertising, right?
No. So, Paul, it's been a great conversation. Let's just wrap this up.
Can I just wrap up with one thing? If you're going to wrap it up, here's my soundbite. Okay.
Yeah.
There's a lot of value in our society placed on physical health. Okay. There's now the big thing is mental health, which I really think is again, as someone who's had significant mental health issues in the past, I think it's a lot of bollocks. I think, Jordan Peterson said, listen, a lot of people who've come to me, who've been my clients as a clinical psychiatrist, they don't have mental health problems. They have insurmountable life problems.
Yeah. Yes.
right? They don't have mental health problems. They have life problems.
Yes.
So here's the thing. It's like everyone talks about physical health. Everyone talks about, or increasingly now they're talking about mental health. The problem is where you need to start is spiritual health. You have to come from a soul-centered place.
Yeah.
You have to, you have to be still. You have to be thinking about your purpose, your values, and where you are in your life. And if you're a secular, it's like it's all about me, and we're part of this culture of self-invention, right? If you're a Christian, then you're part of something much, much grander. Yeah. You're in this incredible narrative that started in Genesis. Your name's in the, you're part of the great show. Spiritual health. Once you have spiritual health, that will lead you to good emotional health. And that's what people aren't talking about these days, because emotional health is the foundation for mental health, which is the foundation for physical health.
Yeah, brilliant. I love that. I just add one point to that. I think, well, sadly, in the last few days, someone very close to me has just been sectioned, which is very sad. And I was thinking about why is that? And actually, they're not too bad on those fronts, Paul. You've just been describing to me. But actually, there are some practical skills. So this particular individual, how does she engage with other people when things get difficult? And her trait is to very much hold on to everything herself, right? Because she doesn't have a huge amount of leadership skills, takes on too much, and fails, frankly, and then tragically stopped sleeping, and the whole thing just went off in a really, really bad place. And I think we need to acknowledge, I think that the other thing I'd add to you, without what you just described, I think the solution is obviously absurd. It follows that the solution to so-called mental health, right, are absurd. So, a lot of which is around exactly the opposite, which is around limiting free speech, for example. So I think what you just said is absolutely vital. I just add, though, that there are some practical skills around how do we engage with each other? What are the perspectives we take? Is it all about us? Is it all about something else, which is related to spirituality, but equally important? But yeah, no, it's been fantastic, Paul. Let's continue this dialogue.
Free speech is important because you know what? We outsource our sanity. It's only if I can sort of say what I'm thinking, and then see how you react to it. And if you're going, I go, okay, yeah, all right, maybe I was a bit off with that. Do you know what I mean? It just happens. It happens naturally. That's how we process ourselves.
Yeah.
We outsource our sanity.
Yeah, and absolutely. In fact, our sanity is defined by other people and the people around us, totally. And I think the notion, what does good look like? It is about a jazz band. And I think the jazz band, and the notion, I think, which is helpful is that the jazz band is something that, and I can't even stand jazz, but the jazz band...
Yeah, no, me neither.
Yeah,
but I get you.
The jazz band is an intimate group of people, right, who've got intimate relationships with each other, who are just playing music based on each other, but they're responding to the audience, Paul. And I think that's the challenge. So the audience is the reality, it's the now, and they are intimate and they're responding very, very closely with a beautiful relationship. And I think that is what good looks like. And that actually is the place where the problems we're talking about, in terms of mental health, and that's very much the outcome of, that's my passion personally, and that's why I've got the Winning Thinking program, actually to create a lot of pain in people, but to develop relationships, to develop that intimacy and the action, because the thought without action also is useless as well. So,
can I just extend your metaphor, or maybe tweak it? If you're talking about the jazz band, if you talk about the audience is the market, and the jazz band is the company, then in order for the jazz band to produce something that's attractive to the market, surely it comes from a sound, but it's energy. Yeah, it's an energetic thing. It's like, when I'm selling, it's like they're not really buying the words that are coming out of your mouth, because let's face it, we could get an actor to come in and actually deliver it a lot better than you. What are they buying? They're buying energy. Where does that energy come from? Again, I'm not. This isn't my model. I'm not. I don't have any ownership about it. But I just think it comes back to spiritual health, emotional health, mental health, physical health. That's where the energy comes from.
Yeah, I think actually there is. I'd say where that energy. I think what it is. What's attractive about it is love, Paul. That's what's attractive about it is love. you can feel that love, and we are going back to what we said before. You know, and actually being part of that team is very loving. It's the best place to be, and this is where we perform at our best. The other thing, when I do various leadership things, I put up a picture of Alan Sugar and your grandmother and say, right, who's the best leader? And actually look at the traits. When anybody ever describes who their best leader is, it's someone who loves them, cares about them, lets them make mistakes, you know, but it's that safe, forgiving place. And I think it's not Alan Sugar, who, frankly, I think is the worst leadership role model I've ever come across. So I think he's
yeah. He's a very unlovely creature.
That loving grandmother is the place to be. And I don't mean that in a soft way. I mean, it's she certainly held you to account as well. So brilliant. Great to speak to you, my friend. And long may we continue the dialogue.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Yeah.
God bless.